Hello and welcome to this live virtual forum. We've just got a couple of folks on right now who dialed in early on our inbound participant line, and thank you for being on for this live virtual forum today. We are dialing out to 79,812 of your fellow constituents in New Jersey's 7th Congressional District, and we will get started in just a moment with this live forum with your Congressman Tom Malinowski. If you have any questions in mind for this forum, it will be focused on the subject of Ukraine and the effects of that war on the U.S. and the rest of the world. If you have questions related to that subject, don't hesitate to press 0, get that question to an operator, and you can either ask it live or let your operator know if you want me to read it over the air to introduce it into the forum. Whatever is more comfortable for you is fine with us. So again, 0 to submit a question. Again, welcome to this live virtual forum. Right now we are dialing out to over 79,800 of your fellow constituents in New Jersey's 7th Congressional District for a live forum. Many of you have likely participated in more focused events in the past. We provided disaster relief assistance, helped constituents get their stimulus funds, or highlighted issues that affect seniors. This will be a forum focused exclusively on the situation in Ukraine and the effects of that war on the U.S. and the rest of the world. Now again, if you have any questions for the Congressman on Ukraine or on the effects of the war on the U.S. and the rest of the world, now's your opportunity to press 0, give that question to an operator. Let them know what you'd like to ask. They'll take some notes and put you in line to ask that question live. Again, if you do not want to ask your question live, that's not an issue at all. I'm happy to read it for you. Just be sure to let your operator know if you want me to read your question and you're not comfortable going live. Otherwise, we're happy to hear from you live today. And again, you can press 0 to submit a question for Q&A. Now, if you do need help from the Congressman's office on other subjects, we can provide assistance for things like accessing public benefits such as Social Security and Medicare, as well as passports and visas, immigration and nationalization services, veterans benefits, or in resolving issues with federal agencies such as the IRS and FEMA, as well as much more. So if you do need assistance from the Congressman's office, we ask that you please visit malinowski.house.gov/casework. Or at the end of this forum, you can leave a voicemail for the Congressman's office. Just make sure you leave your phone number, your email address, and your concern or whatever it is you need assistance with in that voicemail at the end of the forum. We'll have the Congressman's office get back to you. Or again, if you need assistance urgently, you can go to malinowski.house.gov/casework. And let's go ahead and review what we'll be discussing in this forum, and then I'll turn it over to the Congressman to get us started. Many of you have likely participated in more focused events in the past where we provided disaster relief assistance or helped constituents get their stimulus funds or highlighted issues that affect seniors. This is going to be a focused forum focused exclusively on the situation in Ukraine and the effects of that war on the U.S. and the rest of the world. So if you have questions for Congressman Malinowski on that topic, please do press 0, get your question to an operator. You can go live with your question, or you can let your operator know if you're more comfortable having me read your question live. Either way, it's 0 to submit a question. One more quick note before we get started here. If you would like to be updated by the Congressman's office moving forward, you can do that in a couple of ways. You can press 7 here, give an operator your email address. We'll get you added to that email updated list for Congressman Malinowski. But if you're not comfortable doing that, you can also go to malinowski.house.gov/contact/newsletter-subscribe. You can sign up for email updates there as well. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. One more reminder, 0 to submit a question. 7 to give us your email address to get email updates. It's my pleasure to kick off this live forum by turning it over to your Congressman, Tom Malinowski. Please go ahead, Representative.
We've been doing a lot of these town halls recently on issues affecting New Jersey and our district and our country. I know there's a lot of interest in the situation in Ukraine right now. And so I thought it would be a good moment to get together and tell you what we're doing and why, and share some of my thoughts about this terrible war, and a great opportunity for me to hear your concerns and questions as well. As many of you know, I serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Representatives. I spent many years in my career working at the State Department as a diplomat, and I was born in Poland, not far from where this violence is happening, so the situation is somewhat personal to me as well. I was in Ukraine just a couple of weeks before the war started, meeting with President Zelensky and other officials, as well as ordinary Ukrainians. So I've been very intensely engaged over the last several weeks and months, first in trying to stop this war, prevent it, and now in helping Ukraine persevere. We heard from President Zelensky this morning. He gave an address to the Congress, which I hope many of you had a chance to see or read about. I think the most important point he made is that when Ukrainians are fighting, they are not just fighting for their own country, they're fighting for all of us. They're fighting for a set of ideals, principles, and rules that protect every country, including the United States. What Putin is trying to do is something that we, the United States, have tried to prevent in the world ever since the end of the Second World War. He's trying to change borders with tanks. He's trying to establish that big countries can gobble up small countries by force, by violence, just because they want to. And this one man's greed and insecurity and pride is resulting in the deaths of thousands and thousands of innocent people. We see it every night on our TV screens, and it is absolutely tragic and heartbreaking. But this affects us. We have an interest in making sure that the rules of the road in the world are preserved, and therefore that Putin has to pay an enormous price for what he's doing, and ultimately I think he has to be made to lose. Now, we were ready for this. The Biden administration warned the world that Putin was serious, that this was coming, and used the time before the invasion to build an international coalition. All of our allies were lined up before Putin sent his first tank across the border. In effect, we built a prison for him before he committed the crime. So the moment he attacked Ukraine, the sanctions were ready. They were imposed. We spent months before the war building up Ukraine's ability to fight, arming them. And of course, we've continued that effort ever since. And the result of that is that despite the devastation, despite the war crimes we are seeing, despite the unbearable losses that the Ukrainian people are suffering, Putin is not winning. Russia is not winning this war. They've not achieved their objectives. In fact, with the weapons that we have given them, the Ukrainians have killed more Russians in 20 days than the United States lost in Iraq and Afghanistan put together in 20 years. They've been hit very, very, very hard. And they have not, as we have seen, been able to take the capital city of Kyiv or any of the major cities that they have besieged. President Zelensky has asked us for more help. He has asked us, if you saw his speech this morning, to help close the skies above Ukraine. I'm sure we'll talk about what that means in our conversation today. For me, it means that we should help the Ukrainians implement, in effect, their own no-fly zone to make sure that at least Russian aircraft can't fly over the country and drop bombs on innocent people. And today, President Biden announced something that I've been pushing him to do for some time, that we will be arranging the transfer to Ukraine of much more sophisticated anti-aircraft missile systems that will, in fact, help to clear the skies, to protect Ukrainians from at least that kind of devastation. So our strategy here is basically twofold. Number one, to help the Ukrainians hold out, to keep the Russians from moving forward, to continue to make this war as painful as possible for those Russian troops, many of whom are already leaving their equipment behind, deserting, surrendering, while at the same time our sanctions hurt the Russian economy to such a great extent that they will not eventually be able to support their troops in the field. If that happens, if we're successful, then Ukraine gains the upper hand in diplomacy and negotiations. And our hope is that we can find a way for Putin to climb down from this horrific, horrific mistake that he has made. Now, there are still big dangers ahead. A defeated Putin can be a very dangerous Putin, and there are things that he could do that would be very, very scary. And I'm sure you all will have questions. We'll have a chance to talk about that. There are things that we expected him to do that would affect us here at home. One thing that has not happened, at least to a significant extent, is Russian cyber attacks on the United States. They've hit Ukraine, not as badly as we thought they might. We've not yet had a major Russian cyber attack on the United States. We've been very vigilant about that. We may have stopped some things that therefore did not happen, but it's something we have to still be very wary of. And of course, the other huge impact it's had on us is the rise in gas prices that we are all feeling in New Jersey. Almost $1 increase since the war began. And the reason for this is very simple. Russia is the world's second largest producer and exporter of oil. We, the United States, Congress passed a law stopping further imports of Russian oil to America. Those exports to the whole world are pretty much stopped right now because very few countries are buying Russian oil. So we've taken a significant share of the world's oil off the market in just a very short period of time. And obviously, rising gas prices are the inevitable result. The only way to deal with that problem in the short run and to give consumers some relief is to try to find a way to replace the lost Russian oil through increased production in the United States and increased production by other countries like Saudi Arabia that have the greatest unused capacity to produce oil. We can talk again in greater detail about the details of how that can happen, what some of the good ideas are, what some of the bad ideas are. But I think there is a way to address that problem in the coming weeks. And in the long run, you will hear me make the case that we need, in response to this crisis, once and for all, to free ourselves of dependence on these oil-rich dictatorships around the world, whether it's Russia or Iran or Saudi Arabia or Venezuela. We have to accelerate our transition to being the world's clean energy superpower. So those are some of my thoughts, just to set the table. I look forward to hearing your concerns, your questions, your suggestions in the time that we have left. So let's get to questions.
Absolutely, and thank you again, Congressman. And plenty of questions in line. In about 5-10 minutes here, I'll remind folks how they can get casework assistance from the Congressman's office, but let's jump right into our first question coming to us from Joanne. Joanne, welcome, and go ahead with your question for Congressman Malinowski.
Yes, hi, Congressman. I have two questions, and I'll make it quick. Regardless of your if anybody's political position, would you say that if we were energy independent, we'd be in a better position to deal with this war that's going, or this crisis that's going on? Again, I'm not talking about how to become energy independent. I'm just saying if we were energy independent. And then my second question is this. Does it really matter where we produce or get our oil? I mean, to me, it doesn't make sense to me. I would think we would want to get our own oil from our resources as opposed to asking Saudi Arabia or whoever. I mean, climate is climate. Clouds move. Air circulates. That's my question. Thank you, Congressman.
Thanks. Great. And those are really, really good questions. My answer to your first question is yes. It would help if we were energy independent. But here's where it gets complicated, and your second question actually speaks to how complicated this is. Right now, the United States produces more energy than we consume. That's true of all forms of energy. It's also true of oil. We produce more oil in the United States than we use to drive our cars, to heat our homes, etc. A lot of the oil we produce in America is exported to other countries, and then we import oil from other countries to America. So the oil markets work in a strange way. It is a global market, as your second question implies. Even if we were to say double how much oil we drill in the United States, if we could somehow do that overnight, which we can't, but let's say we did, the price of oil and therefore the price we pay for gas would still be dependent on what happens all around the world. If 100 million people in China get cars for the first time and start filling them with gas, demand it would increase and the price of oil would go up as well. If a country like Russia or Saudi Arabia or you name it, Iran, Venezuela, stopped exporting oil because they wanted to hurt us or because of a war like this, the price would still go up no matter how much oil we're producing in the United States because it's a global commodity. So back to your first question, we need to be energy independent, but the only way to be truly independent of these other countries is over time to move away from our dependence on fossil fuels and oil. That's not the solution for today. That's not the solution for tomorrow. I want to get the price of gas down for people who have to drive to work tomorrow, and we can't all have electric cars tomorrow. I get that. But if we want to be truly independent, no longer at the mercy of all these other countries with their instability, the only way to do that is to use different kinds of energy that are not priced as global commodities. And that's where clean energy, setting aside climate change, forget about that for a moment, just from a security point of view, would really, really help us. Thanks so much for the question.
Thank you again. Appreciate you, Congressman. Thank you, Joanne. And a reminder, folks, if you'd like to get email updates from your congressman's office, press 7, give your best email to an operator. We'll keep you updated moving forward. Next question is coming from Judy in Summit. Judy, welcome, and go ahead, please.
Hi, Tom. I'm wondering, what is the United States' current status on accepting Ukrainian refugees?
President Biden has said we will accept Ukrainian refugees. As you know, around 2 million people have come out already, right? And they've come out to countries like Poland, Romania, Slovakia, the countries on the border that have been incredibly generous. We have a refugee quota, an annual quota in the United States, which went down to almost zero during the last administration. Biden put it back up to 60,000. So within that quota, unless the president raises it, we can take at least some share of the refugees that are coming out. And the president has said we will be generous and we will do that, and I support that. One thing to keep in mind, we're still at a very early point in this crisis. Any Ukrainian who wants to leave their country, unless you are a male between the ages of 18 and 60, can easily cross the border to Poland or to one of these neighboring countries. And once they are there, they're welcomed with open arms. They get financial support. They will be taken very good care of by our European partners. So very immediately their needs are being met. And most of these folks aren't yet looking for permanent resettlement in another country, because their attitude is, I left because my city is being bombed, but I want to go home as soon as I can, as soon as we win. They are not yet of the mindset that their country is going to lose, that they're not going to be able to go back. And I think they're right. I actually think most of them are going to be able to go back to help rebuild their country. So right now, we don't yet have a huge demand of people who are looking to permanently resettle as refugees in Europe and the United States. But if it comes to that, we need to be, we need to be generous. We need to share this burden with our European allies. And of course, these are wonderful people. If they become Americans, they will be great Americans, in my opinion.
Thank you again, Congressman, and thank you for our last question coming from Judy. Let's go to Andrew in Union County next. Andrew, welcome, and go ahead, sir. Andrew, can you hear us? Are you there?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Okay. Yeah. Yep. You're live. Go ahead with your question, please.
Okay. Thank you. So, Congressman, my question is about cybersecurity, since you mentioned that. So as it relates to, like, the power grid, it's one thing I wonder about every now and then, because Putin is, of course, a very insane man, and I wonder about the possibility of, cyber attacks to us, such as to our power grid. Is anything being done over here in the U.S. as far as, shoring up the security of that to make sure that, it doesn't remain so vulnerable against attacks from afar or even from within. But yes, it's one thing I think about, especially now in the midst of this crisis abroad.
Absolutely. Very good question. We have been working on that from way before this crisis, as you can imagine. We have been vulnerable, and the Department of Homeland Security has been working with our public utilities and utility companies across the country to identify potential vulnerabilities, to show them how those vulnerabilities can be closed. We have been encouraging and trying to require reporting to the federal government of any cyber incidents, any attempted cyber intrusions from particularly companies involved in the distribution of power in the United States. As you recall, we had a cyber attack attributed to Russia last year on a major oil pipeline in the United States that was not immediately reported to the federal government. So that's something we're trying to fix. And of course, since this crisis began, and in the weeks prior to it, the Department of Homeland Security has been intensely working with public utilities in particular to make sure that they're ready. So far so good. We have not had at least a major successful attack. That doesn't mean there haven't been attempts. In cybersecurity, if there's no news, that's good news. But no news doesn't mean that no one tried to do anything. So I think we can take some confidence in that some of our protections, some of our defenses are working. I would also say that the best defense is a good offense. And we have said to the Russians that we have the same capability to hit them as they do to hit us, and that any attack like that affected the American people would be met with a similar type of response. We can take down their power grid if we have to. And as much as we've already hurt Russia with sanctions, I don't think Putin wants to see the lights go out in Moscow either. So we have a deterrent that I think is an effective and important part of our strategy. Thanks for the question.
Thank you again, Congressman. Appreciate you. And Andrew, great question, and thanks for your participation today. Let's go to John in New Providence. John, you're live.
Thank you, Congressman. I know there's been a lot of attention about oil production. However, Russia and Ukraine are major exporters of wheat and other foodstuffs. What are we doing to increase our production so there's no shortages down the road?
It's a really good question. Yeah, we've been focusing on oil and gas because it's hitting us now. But you're absolutely right. Ukraine and Russia grow a lot of wheat in particular. That's another global commodity that where the price can be affected in any part of the world, including the United States, if a major supplier to global markets goes dark. So we've discussed this with the administration, with the Department of Agriculture. I know that they are focused on this as a kind of a medium-term threat, and I don't have as detailed an answer for you as I would on the oil and gas question. But certainly the United States, which truly is the world's breadbasket, we are kind of the Saudi Arabia in this equation, where we would, I think, be called upon to make up for some of what would be lost. And I do think the United States, our farmers do have the capacity to grow and produce more than they might normally grow and produce in a normal growing season. And it's still fairly early in the year. So without getting too deep into something that I'm not an expert on, let me just say it's a really good question and one that we've been asking. And I think the administration's been pretty good at thinking ahead on other issues, and I'm counting on them to do the same on this as well.
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for our last question from John. Let's go right to David next. Hey, David, welcome, and go ahead with your question.
Congressman, I have two hopefully relatively direct questions. The first one, and I've heard about the concern with regards to Russia. What would it take to remove Russia from the UN Security Council? And will you support that effort? Since at this point, I kind of consider them a rogue nation, and I think it's insulting to have them as members of the UN Security Council. The other question, a little bit more detailed, but I'll just cut to the chase. I think Putin is a modern-day Hitler. If we knew what Hitler was doing back in the past, we would never have sat still and watched his genocide. And I, for one, feel like I'm doing that right now. Genocide and war crimes. And we hear about possible chemical weapons now. And I'm not for war, but I think Russia and Putin has to be physically stopped. So I guess my second part of the question is, we seem like we're doing too much talking and not acting. And I'd like to get a better sense of your perspective on where we're going to draw the line between sanctions and assisting in some form of armed intervention.
Thank you so much. So, on your first question, I agree. Russia should not be a member of the Security Council. They are a permanent member. As you know, that means they can veto just like we can, so they have enormous power to stop good things from happening in the UN. However, it would be extremely hard to kick them off. The UN Charter, which is sort of the constitution of the UN, basically says that to kick a member off of the Security Council, you would have to change the charter itself, because the charter says that Russia, the United States, China, France, and England are permanent members. And to change the charter, the Constitution, you would need first a vote of the General Assembly, which is the body of all the states that are members of the UN. We could probably get that through the General Assembly, but then it has to be approved by the Security Council, where Russia has a veto. So it's a catch-22. They would be able to veto any measure that takes away their right to have a veto. And I don't know a legal way of getting around that, unfortunately. So I support it in principle. Would love to be proven wrong, that there may be a workaround, but that's my understanding of how the rules work. On your second question, I agree that he needs to be physically stopped. I think we're doing that. I think we should not discount the power of what we are already doing. And I know I hear this from many people, and I feel it myself when you see those images on television of the war crimes happening as we speak. We feel the sense of helplessness, a strong sense that we must do more. There must be something we can do that would stop that right away. And the fact is, there isn't anything that would stop it right away, and what we are doing is already incredibly powerful. I said at the outset that with the weapons we have provided to the Ukrainians, particularly the anti-tank weapons, the Stinger missiles, the drones, just the regular arms and ammunition, we have enabled them to, and this is grisly stuff, and I want to put it in the starkest terms, we've enabled them to kill more Russian soldiers in 20 days than we, the United States, lost in Afghanistan and Iraq in 20 years. These are devastating losses that we are inflicting on the Russians, and we have stopped their movement. The sanctions are also devastating. The Russian economy is basically shut down. Stores are closed. Shopping malls are closed. Businesses are fleeing. Trade is stopped. You can't get dental care in Russia today because all of the supplies that dentists use come from other countries, and they're gone. It's just one example of hundreds that I could give you. It will be very hard for them to sustain that for more than a few weeks or certainly months. And then meanwhile, their soldiers are dying in huge numbers on the battlefield and not moving forward. So as horrible as these images are, I think what we are doing is working. And I think to escalate it to the only possible next stage, which would be the United States not just helping Ukrainians fight, but fighting ourselves, directly getting into a war with the Russian military, I think would be quite dangerous. This is a nuclear-armed superpower, and in some ways, I think Putin, as he faces potential defeat against a small country like Ukraine, might want to broaden this, might want to turn it into a world war, where he would be negotiating with the Europeans and with us and threatening us potentially with forms of warfare that we thought were no longer imaginable in the 21st century. So I would urge you, I would ask, keep asking us to do more, but do have some confidence in the power of what we are already doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you again, Congressman. Thank you to constituents of the 7th Congressional District of New Jersey for joining this forum. We are focused, of course, on the war in Ukraine and the effects of that war on the U.S. and the rest of the world. But if you do need assistance from the Congressman's office, you can access that at malinowski.house.gov/casework. And you can get assistance with accessing public benefits or resolving issues with federal agencies like the IRS or FEMA. So again, malinowski.house.gov/casework if you need assistance from his office. Or we're about 28 minutes left in this live forum. When we get to the end, if you still need assistance or still have a question for the Congressman's office, you can leave a voicemail message with your name, your phone number, and your email address as well as your concern, and we'll have somebody follow up with you as quickly as possible. And one more reminder, folks, if you want to get email updates from the Congressman's office, press 7 here. Speak to an operator, give them your best email address. That queue just got cleared, and thanks to those of you who have already done so. Appreciate you. Let's go to Valentine in Hackettstown next. Howdy, Valentine. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Congressman. The question is about very kind of difficult and a bit ambiguous subject about the biolabs in Ukraine, which, of course, Russians are trying to twist that information and give a totally different purpose. But according to my research, for instance, electronic integrated disease surveillance system states that there were labs, and indeed in Ukraine, and they were financed by U.S. DoD, stating that the first lab appeared around November of 2009. So the question is, what is your take on that? What is additional information you can share with me and other people on the call? Of course, we have a limited time, but anyway, that's still.
Sure. Well, this is, when Putin decided to invade Ukraine, he gave a number of reasons, most of which I think were bogus, but they were the reasons that he gave. All the bad things the Ukrainians were doing, and Ukraine wanted to join Nato and bring the U.S. Army close to its borders and all this stuff. Again, most of it was not real. I think his real motivation was that he was just so threatened by Ukraine's existence as an independent, successful democracy right on his borders. He didn't like the example Ukraine was setting for the Russian people. He has this dream of reuniting the old Soviet Union. Ukraine was an important part of the old Soviet Union. He feels it's his destiny to bring it all back together by force if necessary. But it was interesting, for all the reasons he gave, the day he invaded Ukraine, he didn't mention anything but biolabs. This was something that entered Russian propaganda quite a bit later, which I think is as much evidence as I need that it's completely bogus. But basically, the truth of the matter here is that at the end of the Cold War, in 1991, when the old Soviet Union collapsed, there was a nuclear weapons program, obviously. They had nuclear weapons facilities all over the place, including in Ukraine. They also had chemical and biological weapons research facilities all over the place. And so the United States, under a cooperative program, actually, that we set up with the Russian government, did a lot of cooperative work with Russian scientists that had been engaged in that kind of research to try to support civilian work, to try to make sure that they were using their talents for purposes that were not threatening to the world. And some of that work was conducted in Ukraine with the cooperation of the Ukrainian government and the full knowledge of the Russian government. And now they're twisting this into some kind of strange conspiracy about biolabs to create a justification for this horrible, cruel, murderous war at a point when they seem to be losing. So that's the best answer I can give you. And I hope nobody buys that stuff.
Yeah. Thank you, Congressman. Appreciate that. And we'll go to our next question from Dan in Lambertville, who's asked me to read this one. He says, the U.S. needs to implement a no-fly zone over Ukraine ASAP. We don't know what Putin will do in defeat because it's never happened. Can you take that concern on from Dan in Lambertville, please?
Sure. President Zelensky has asked us to help him close the skies. It's a legitimate request. The question is how we do it. For the United States to implement a no-fly zone, we should be very clear about what that means. I have supported no-fly zones in other places. When I was at the State Department, I argued for a no-fly zone in Syria, for example. We didn't do it. I still think that was a mistake. But be clear about what that means. A no-fly zone means that the U.S. Air Force would have to fly over Ukraine. We would have to identify all of the Russian air defense systems on the ground and destroy them because our pilots could not fly safely over Ukraine if the Russian air defenses were still working. So the first thing we'd have to do is fire missiles at Russian air defenses on the ground. And then we would have to be prepared to shoot down Russian aircraft over Ukraine. We'd have to have dogfights with Russian fighter jets. That would be absolutely the United States firing the first shots in a war with Russia. So very, very high risk. And the reward, I don't think, would be extremely great. Yes, we do want to keep Russian planes out of the skies over Ukraine, but to this point, at least, most of the destruction that has been meted out against Ukrainian cities, most of those projectiles that you see smashing into apartment buildings in cities like Kyiv are not coming from the sky. They are being fired by artillery and rocket launchers and missile launchers on the ground. So to do something about that, our no-fly zone would have to become a no-drive zone. We'd have to use our planes to fire at all of this Russian artillery on the ground. And then, boy, are we in the middle of a war with Russia. So we can still be for that. People can argue for that. I just want to make sure that we know exactly what that is. The alternative, which is what I support, is that we help the Ukrainians enforce their own no-fly zone. And Zelensky's fine with this. He says, all right, if you don't do it, help us do it. And the best way to do that is to get them longer range, more sophisticated, more effective anti-aircraft missiles that they can use immediately. They can't use American-made systems because we'd have to train them over time. But a lot of our Eastern European NATO allies have Russian-made systems, like, for example, the S-300 system. You've been hearing about that in the news, I think, that are very effective and that the Ukrainians are trained on. And so what we're doing right now, this is what I've called for, and Biden is doing it now, is helping these Eastern European countries make those transfers, and then we replenish the Eastern European countries with our systems so that they don't lose anything in the bargain. That's the biggest game changer I think we can introduce. The Ukrainians have also asked us to get them Russian-made fighter jets that some of our Eastern European allies have as well, and I'm for that too. But I don't think it's as important as the anti-aircraft system. The Ukrainians have planes. They're just actually not flying them very much because they don't want to put their pilots at risk. Russian air defenses, as I mentioned, are pretty lethal. So these ground-to-air anti-aircraft systems, I think, are the thing that can make the greatest difference. I'm glad to say we started to transfer those now. Thanks.
And thank you again, Congressman. Thank you to Dan for our last question. We'll move to our next one coming from Steve in Asbury. Steve, thanks for joining. Go ahead.
Hi, Congressman. How are you doing today?
Hey,
one of the questions I have generally is, with, coming out of COVID, which I kind of feel that the government really hasn't helped too much businesses or even individuals in regard to, their financial hit to that. And now with inflation, rising so rapidly, in addition with the Fed now saying they're going to increase the interest rates, and now this war causing more inflation for us and more trouble. I mean, what is your general position or even Congress's position on additional assisting in finances for, us as constituents, considering that, our financial situation is just continuing to get further affected, not only by COVID coming out of it, but now with this war that so quickly the government has approved all this money for Ukraine, but seems that the American people and businesses are being left behind.
Thanks so much for the question. So, look, there is inflation in general, and then there's the gas prices, which are affected by the conflict. So let me take both of those on. No question that inflation is a huge problem right now. It's a tax on working Americans, and right now it's about the numbers I've seen suggest that the average working family is spending about $300 more a month because of inflation. There are some things we can do about that. Some of it, not all of it, but some of it is supply chain shortages. We have more money to spend. A lot of us came out of the pandemic with a lot of money to spend. I think I would give the government some credit for that, for helping small businesses and consumers. But there's a huge supply crunch, in part because COVID is still raging around the world. We've got factory shutdowns. In Asia right now, we have a huge semiconductor shortage that has spiked the price of new and used cars and a lot of other consumer electronics and other technologies. So one of the things we're working on is to try to bring the manufacturing of some of those critical technologies back to the United States. I helped write a bill called the America Competes Act, which passed the House. A different version passed the Senate that focuses on the microchip situation and on manufacturing of other critical technologies and industries, from batteries to rare earth minerals to pharmaceutical ingredients and PPE, and really jump-starting production in the United States of stuff that we've lost to other countries over the years. So that's something that I am personally working on. I mentioned, you asked about financial assistance. I mentioned that the inflation tax is about $300 a month per family. I would point out that we had a child tax credit of $300 a month per child that a lot of working and middle-class families were receiving in New Jersey and around the country, which a lot of us tried to extend through this year. But some of my friends in the Senate were not willing to do that. And that's exactly basically what we're paying for inflation, is $300 a month. So that would have helped, and I'd still like to see that tax credit restored. Now back to gas prices. As I mentioned at the outset, I think there are some things we can do. I mentioned one obvious one is that we do need to drill more. I'm an environmentalist. I care about climate change. But in the short run, we do need to increase production in the United States and other countries to make up for what we're losing in terms of Russian oil. The president is drawing oil from our strategic reserves, but there's a lot more we can do to compel our oil companies to use the leases that they have, including on public lands. Our oil companies are sitting on like 9,000 unused drilling leases right now. I think they kind of like the price going up because their profits go up as well. We got to put a lot of pressure on them to use those leases or to lose them. That's what I've proposed. Second, in terms of getting relief to people, I support a temporary tax on these huge windfall profits that the oil companies are earning, and using the the proceeds from that tax to give every working and middle-class American a rebate to help afford the rising price of gas and energy right now. Look, we're asking ordinary Americans to sacrifice in this national security crisis. We may have to do that, but I'm not comfortable asking you to sacrifice while companies like Chevron and ExxonMobil are not asked to do anything at all. I think that sacrifice needs to be more broadly shared. Thanks so much.
And thank you again, Congressman. We have about 14 minutes left, folks, so if you wanted to get email updates from the Congressman's office, now's your last opportunity to press 7. Give us your best email, get added to that update list, or you can go to malinowski.house.gov/contact/newsletter-subscribe. And let's go to our next live question. This one's coming to us from, we have Niranjan on the line. Niranjan, you're live. Go ahead.
Hi, Congressman. Yes, I have two questions. First is, countries that support Putin, why don't we have sanctions against them, or, how can we encourage them to stop supporting Putin? And secondly, back to domestic, what's happening with our infrastructure bill, Build It Better? Are we going to get anything going there? Because it looks like the economy is slowing down. Inflation today, first-time interest rates have been pushed up in many years. Those are my two questions. Thank you.
Sure. Let me start with the second. So the infrastructure bill passed. That's law. That's the good news. We have the biggest investment in domestic infrastructure in our roads, our bridges, our tunnels, our mass transit, broadband internet, our water infrastructure to protect us against flooding. Biggest investment since the interstate highway system under President Eisenhower. And New Jersey is going to get a lot of that. I've already had a chance to announce some little projects in our congressional district. And then there's the big one for New Jersey, the Gateway Tunnel, our railway tunnel under the Hudson River, which is going to be funded by the infrastructure bill. That is going to create a lot of jobs, bring a lot of economic opportunity to New Jersey. And so that's something we can be happy about. That's Congress actually did its job there. And for me, that was like my number one priority in the last 2 years. So I'm very, very happy. On your first question, we can absolutely use sanctions to go after any country or companies in other countries that help Russia evade sanctions. And the big one here is China, potentially. Putin has turned to China for help. It's not clear yet what China's going to do. They're kind of hedging their bets. But we have told them that if they start doing business with sanctioned entities in Russia, like the central bank and Russian companies and Russian oligarchs that have been sanctioned by the United States, that they run the risk of being sanctioned themselves. They can either be part of the normal global economy with the United States, with Western Europe, or they can go and be in the doghouse with the Russians and see how they like it. So we absolutely can do that, and hopefully the threat of it is enough to ensure that countries around the world don't rush to Putin's rescue. So far, I think that's mostly working well enough. Thank you.
Thank you again to Niranjan for that question, and we'll go to Diana and Warren next. Diana, welcome, and go ahead, please.
Hi, Congressman. Disinformation is at the root of keeping Putin's war going, even today, and even China's picking it up. Any thoughts further about how we can get at some of the root cause of these dictators and get information into closed societies like those two?
Yeah. Well, so there's two challenges. One is how do we get good information into Russia, into these closed societies? And that's tough because, he's got total control over his television networks. We saw a brave Russian journalist risk a lot for freedom, for life potentially, holding up a sign on one of the Russian television news networks a few days ago saying they're lying to you here. But he's got control over that. The internet still exists in Russia, and there's a lot of good information coming being sent into Russia over the internet. We have U.S. government-funded entities like Radio Free Europe that do a lot of good work with Russian dissidents, Russian journalists, independent Russian journalists, trying to get information in. We just funded that in the annual federal budget that we passed last week. So we're doing our very best. The second part of the challenge is protecting our own democracy from disinformation. And, all these bad guys, they use Facebook, they use Twitter, they use our social media networks, they know how to game them. And unfortunately, our social media is set up in a way that facilitates the spread of the worst kind of disinformation. I have a bill that I'm working really hard to try to advance this year to try to hold our social media companies, beginning with Facebook, accountable for the ways in which they amplify and recommend content to us using their algorithms that basically gives precedence, gives priority to content that makes people angry, that makes people divided from each other. If you go on Facebook, if you like something, the algorithm gives it 1 point. If you use an angry face emoji, the algorithm gives it 5 points in terms of how likely it is to be recommended to other people on Facebook. And that tells you all you need to know about how social media works and how these bad guys can take advantage of our own media to get the worst, most divisive, most anger-inducing disinformation out there, not just to tell their story, but to disrupt our democracy, to make us angry at each other. So that's something I really want to do something about. Thanks for raising it.
Thank you again. Appreciate you, Congressman. Thank you to Diana. We'll go to Nicole next. We did just clear another pretty substantial queue of folks who were asking to give us their email address. If you want to give us your email address before the end here, you can still press 7. We just added some more operators to that queue. So 7 if you'd like to get email updates from your congressman. Nicole is in line next. Thanks to Nicole and Basking Ridge for joining. You're live. Go ahead.
Congressman, thank you so much for this forum. Your summary of so many of these key points of information is very helpful. I just want to tag on to something. I believe the caller was Steve. He had a concern about just the economic impact to local New Jerseyans and thinking about the gas prices. And we in New Jersey have the unique facet as tools on our commute. So many of us are impacted by the Garden State Parkway and some, the toll lanes there. Is there any discussion among the leadership to just kind of give us a toll holiday for a little bit and maybe reduce some of the impacts of inflation, et cetera? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Nicole. And it's a good question. So the tolls, the tolls would be set by the state of New Jersey, not by the federal government. I don't want to punt the question, but just to let you know who has to make that decision. That would be for the governor and the state legislature. I know they've thought about gas tax, whether there should be a temporary holiday at the state level. We thought about that at the federal level as well. I don't know if they thought about tolls, but I'll ask that question. One difficulty is that the tolls and the gas taxes fund highway maintenance and repair, right? So if you have a period when we're not collecting those fees and those tolls, the trust funds that pay for the maintenance on our highways get depleted. So we'd have to figure out a way to replenish those funds. It's not impossible. It's just a practical challenge. I thought a lot about the federal gas tax. It's 18 cents per gallon, so it's not a lot. It's something, but it's not a huge amount when you're looking at gas that's $4.30, $4.40 a gallon. And I'd be very okay with a federal gas tax holiday. The problem there is that the way that gas tax works, it's charged really to the oil companies. The oil company pays the gas tax at a very early stage in the process of getting you the gas. It's not actually paid by the gas station. And we haven't figured out a sure way of doing it that ensures that the big oil companies will pass the savings down to the refiner, the distributor, the gas station, and ultimately to you, the consumer. So unless it's passed down to you, it's not worth anything. So we're looking at it, but I've decided probably the better way to do this is basically to tax the big oil companies on their record profits that they're making right now. Nothing wrong with it. They're companies. They're in the job of making money for their shareholders, but they are making record profits. And I think a temporary windfall profits tax funding direct rebates, checks that would be sent to you, to working and middle-class Americans, would be the best way to ensure that you actually get the benefit. So that's my initial answer, but I'll ask our friends in the state of New Jersey whether they've considered doing anything with tolls temporarily. It's a fair question.
Much appreciated. Thank you again, Congressman. Excellent forum so far, folks. We have just a few minutes left and we'll have time for Lewis and Hillsborough up next. I wanted to remind folks, though, that you can get additional assistance from the Congressman's office if there's something you need help with by staying on at the end, leaving a voicemail with your name, your phone number, and your email address along with your question or concern so that they can follow back up with you. Or you can go to malinowski.house.gov/casework. We're going to go to Lewis and Hillsborough as our last question here. Lewis, you're live. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for your time and efforts today. Although my biggest concern is regarding any nuclear retaliation for aiding our allies for the Russia-Ukraine situation, I'm also concerned of war profiteering, and I think you answered some of my question earlier, but you can reiterate. How does our government plan to scrutinize any public or private entities that stand to gain any immense profit by enabling this warfare and suffering?
Well, thanks for your question. And actually, before I answer it, I know we're hitting the 7 o'clock hour, but if the folks managing the call are willing to stay a few extra minutes, I'm certainly willing to take a couple more questions because I want to make sure that we get to the important ones. In answer to your question, nobody's profiting. I don't think anyone's profiting from this horrible war, which we did everything we could to try to stop and prevent. Once Putin started it, I want to help the Ukrainian people defend their homes and their families. And so I do support giving them the weapons and ammunition that they need to fight. They'd be fighting anyway. They'd be fighting with sticks if they had to. But I want to give them something that they can actually use and be successful and win, not just for their sake, but for our sake. I want the lesson of this war to be for all the dictators of the world: do not try this. If you try this, you will lose. If you try this, you will be hurt. That's the best way to ensure we don't have more wars like this in the future. And of course, the more wars, the more arms the arms manufacturers get to produce. And if you're concerned about that, I think the best way to prevent that kind of profiteering is to prevent war. And I think right now the best way to prevent war is to ensure that the good guys persevere in this one. Thank you so much. And again, I'm willing to take a couple more if we can technically do it.
Happy to do it, yeah. Sure thing. Let's get Jacqueline in Hampton. She's in line next. Hey, Jacqueline, thanks for waiting. Go ahead.
Hi, good evening, Congressman. I was calling because I really wanted to know what we as constituents here in New Jersey can actually do to try to help the Ukrainian people, whether it be donating to an organization that will help them, whether they need clothing, medical supplies, etc. I feel really helpless, and I feel like there's something that I want to be able to do for them.
Thanks so much. Well, thanks for asking and for your interest in helping in that way. There are a lot of wonderful organizations that are helping Ukrainians right now, and some of them are, I think, well known to a lot of us. Great charitable organizations like Catholic Charities, like the International Rescue Committee, Doctors Without Borders, that work all around the world, but they've got dedicated programs in Ukraine and in the neighboring countries helping the people who are leaving. And you can easily find their Ukraine-specific pages on the internet, and I would urge you to go find them and find the organization that's doing work that's closest to your heart, that's closest to your interests. There are also Ukrainian groups. There is a Ukrainian English language newspaper called the Kiev Independent, which not only does great reporting from Ukraine, but also has put up a page with a lot of local Ukrainian organizations that are doing everything from helping the hospitals and the journalists in Ukraine who are so bravely covering this war. And even if you are so moved, there are ways to donate directly to the Ukrainian military. And so if you go on the Kiev Independent website, you'll easily be able to find their page where they recommend different ways you can help local groups. So no shortage of opportunities to help in that way, and thank you for your interest in doing so.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jacqueline. Let's get one more in here from Napoleon in North Plainfield. Napoleon, you're up. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello, Congressman. Given the naysayers in this country as well as maybe in Europe, I wanted to ask you, how strong do you believe is the will of NATO and the United States to maintain the sanctions indefinitely?
I think our will is pretty strong. I think Putin miscalculated there. I think he thought he could divide us. He thought he could divide Ukrainians, some of whom are Russian-speaking, as you may know, some of whom speak Ukrainian. That didn't happen. He thought he could divide Europeans, that he could peel off one or two countries in Europe from NATO and from the consensus we built, and he failed there. He thought he could divide Americans, Republicans versus Democrats. Heck, even the U.S. Congress is pretty united in helping Ukraine. That's a pretty big achievement. And NATO has been incredibly strong in moving troops and equipment to the frontline countries like Poland that we are sworn to defend, and in mobilizing help for the Ukrainian military. And so if anybody had any doubts before this war, I think those doubts have been erased. And that's important because, again, there are other dangerous countries and dictators out there in the world who are watching this. China's watching this very, very carefully. And I think we've impressed upon them the strength and unity of this alliance of democracy that they may have doubted. I think China, which has its own designs, for example, on Taiwan. You all, I know that this is something we've been worried about for some years, that China might want to invade Taiwan, which would be horrible and violent and brutal and hugely disruptive to the global economy. I know they're looking at what we're doing, and I think the message they're getting is that trying to invade Taiwan would be even more dangerous than they might have thought, in part because of this unity among democratic countries. So that is good. What is happening in Ukraine is terrible and tragic, and the losses are unbearable. But I do think that the democracies are winning this fight. And of course, I believe that we must win, and that's why I've been so focused on it. I've been so dedicated to making sure that our government, that President Biden, that the Congress act in the right way. One thing I didn't tell you all about is a bill that I've introduced that is bipartisan, supported by Republicans and Democrats in the House. It was just introduced in the Senate by Senators Lindsey Graham and Sheldon Whitehouse. It's a bill that would allow the Biden administration not just to freeze the assets of these Russian oligarchs, their yachts and their villas and their bank accounts and their soccer teams and all the stuff that they own, but to actually seize those things and to dispose of them and to use the proceeds to help the people of Ukraine. I see a $600 million yacht. Think about that, $600 million yacht. And I think, man, that could pay for rebuilding a lot of Ukraine. I see a $1 billion soccer team in England that's owned by a Russian oligarch. That could pay to help a lot of Ukrainian families get back into their homes. And so I'd like to give the administration the option, at least, of being able to seize some of those assets for the benefit of the future of the people of this country that have fought so bravely, not just for their freedom, but for our freedom. So with that, thank you all so much. Really, really wonderful, excellent questions. And if there are more, please shoot us emails. If there's ways that we can help anybody individually, let us know, and we will respond to you very, very quickly.
Thank you again, Congressman, and thank you to the constituents of New Jersey's 7th Congressional District for helping us take on a really difficult subject. We got over 100 questions today, and thanks so much to those of you who submitted them and hung with us for over an hour here to hear the answers from Congressman Malinowski, and of course, thanks to him for leading this discussion today. A reminder, if you need additional assistance from his office, you can get that at malinowski.house.gov/casework, or stay on the line here. Leave a voicemail message with whatever issue or concern you're dealing with, and make sure you leave your phone number and your email address in that voicemail. Again, you can do that just by staying on the line. If you leave your phone and email along with your issue, we will have the Congressman's office call back as soon as they possibly can. And one more reminder, if you didn't get a chance to give us your email address, you can sign up for email updates from Congressman Malinowski by going to malinowski.house.gov/contact/newsletter-subscribe. Again, that's just on his website at malinowski.house.gov. And that'll wrap us up for today. Thanks again, everybody. We appreciate you and your time. Have a great day.